Okay, this tutorial is a bit of an extensive tutorial. It's one on doing color correction in Premiere. This is quite comprehensive. So if you want a quick tutorial, don't watch this one because this is an extensive, comprehensive, long, drawn-out one and incredibly boring. But yeah, so there you go. Anyway, color correction. Let's talk about color correction concept really quick, and then we will get into color correcting a project here and showing you guys how to do color correction on a project. And this is this isn't just like a basic, just throw some filters on. This is actual color correction here. Kind of three goals with color correction. First of all, we're going to work with what's called legality. So these are kind of the three major components of color correction here. We shouldn't almost call it color correction as much as we should be calling it color grading, because you're not correcting shots, but you're also changing shots and altering shots to give them a different look, which isn't necessarily defined as correction. But our three goals here is going to be meeting legality, making sure your shots are kind of legally meeting the legal requirements of color correction. The next one is going to be matching. Another goal is matching. And then kind of the third category is going to be looks, adding a specific look to your project. So there's basically meeting legal requirements, matching shots so they all conform and look the same, and then finally looks. And this two ways you do this will be with these are kind of the basics here, dealing with tonality, and the other one is going to be dealing with color specifically. So these two categories right here, tonality and color, you're going to meet legality, match shots, and add looks based on, especially tonality and color, meeting those requirements, those two requirements for legality and matching here. So you can take these two and add them to each little category here. What tonality is, we're going to describe this really quick, is basically speaking, it's like brightness and contrast. You're dealing with brightness and contrast. You're dealing with what we call the darks, mids, and highlights of a shot. There we go. Darks, mids, and highlights of a shot. Basically, this is affecting your color, but we're looking at it from a basic standpoint. As much as we're just looking at it as not affecting color. It's just your brightness and contrast of your shots, which does affect your color, but we're just sticking with the basics right now. Color. Now, color. We're going to show you some tools where you deal with color, but I just wanted to kind of define tonality colors, where you're actually adjusting the colors, the red, greens, and blues in your video. When you're dealing with video, you're dealing with what's called an RGB color space, which is basically a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel. Basically, with RGB channels, you've got three different video channels you're working with your image. You've got one that's just based on shades of red, on darkness, mids, and light levels of red. One dealing with the green channel, and one dealing with the blue channel. We've got your reds, greens, and blue. You combine all three of these, and you will end up with you mix those together, and you end up with your full color image there. But it's basically three channels that you're going to be altering and changing. Good to know. Anyway, so let's kind of dive into it here. First of all, in Premiere, you got to know how to add an effect to your shot. I will have some tutorials on adding effects to shots within Premiere. But what you're going to do here is you're going to simply select a shot. You're going to go to your Effects tab, and you're going to find a certain video effect that you want to add. If you want to add let's just do a Gaussian blur here. I'm going to type in blur in the search engine here, and it will narrow these filters down to the ones with the word blur in the title. And drag and drop this onto a clip. Now when you add that onto a clip, you highlight the clip, you have your playhead over it, and you go up next to your source monitor to your Effects Controls tab. As long as you have the clip selected, it will show all the attributes that you have added to this. First of all, the motion, opacity, and time remapping are all native to the clip, but you'll notice this Gaussian blur here. I can delete that. Just highlight it and hit delete, and it's gone. I'm going to undo and bring it back. But that's been added. These things you can't delete. You can change, but you can't delete. But if we look at the attributes here of Gaussian blur, if you grab this slider, click and drag, you'll notice it changes. As long as you got your playhead over it, it's changing the attributes. That is a filter or an effect that we've added to the clip. And now you can turn that on or off by clicking that effects tab there, and you'll see the filter changes over here on the clip. You can also keyframe those. We'll get that on another discussion. But I'm going to delete that clip. I'm going to go back into my effects here, and I'm going to type fast. Because the fast color corrector is one of the most basic color correctors in Premiere. There's a whole lot of color correctors. If you look under the color corrector, under the effects tab here, you'll notice it's got a ton of different color correctors. The ones that I use the most is going to be fast color corrector, RGB color corrector, three-way color corrector, and the Luma curves is also nice as well. There's also RGB curves, which is pretty helpful as well. But two basic ones we're going to kind of go over here is going to be fast color corrector and the Luma curve. I'm going to grab my fast color corrector, drag and drop it onto the clip. Notice it does not change the effects at all when you drag it on. With the color correctors, they come in neutral, meaning they don't take any effect when you first pull them on. But we look over here at the fast color corrector, and we'll see some attributes here. By the way, if you ever need to reset anything, this is the reset for the entire effect and resets for specific attributes under the fast color corrector, but that's the overall reset right there. A couple things that we're going to be using in here. It's going to be this hue, balance, and angle wheel. We're going to talk about that, but this is mainly for affecting colors. And down here, you've got your tonality sliders here for affecting your darks, your mids, and your highlights, and creating contrast. Let's talk quickly about legality. I'm going to go under Window. Whenever you're doing color correction under Premiere, you're going to go under Window, Workspace, and arrange this for color correction, because you're going to want to see some scopes while you are, because every monitor is a little bit different, and even if you are slightly colorblind, like 10% of all dudes are colorblind, if you don't believe me, go to Google and just type in colorblind test. Under colorblind test, you can click on one of these here, and it will take you through a test to see if you are colorblind. Like right there is a 16. Right here, see, I don't see anything there, and a lot of people do. I am colorblind. I'm one of those brown, green, red colorblind people. I see colors, but I just don't see specific types of colors. Right there, I don't see anything. 10% of all dudes will have the same color blindness. Most females will not have this type of color blindness. It's a male gene. Anyway. So what I'm saying is you do need scopes to be able to color correct, because sometimes the monitors aren't accurate and sometimes you're colorblind. There you go. Down here, what you're probably going to end up seeing by default is going to be this, a composite video right there. The way you change that, what we're going to use this for here, instead of our reference monitor, we're going to use this for our scopes. We're going to click on this little drop-down menu here, and we're going to go under, right now I'm going to show all scopes. You got 4 different scopes here. One is a YUV waveform, one is an RGB waveform, this is a YC waveform, or just a regular waveform monitor, and this is a Vectorscope. 2 basic ones that we're going to be using, I'm going to be teaching, is the waveform and the Vectorscope. So let's start out with, and what the waveform is used for is for your brightness and contrast and mids, darks, your tonality. This is basically for brightness and contrast and your levels, as they call it. And this not necessarily dealing with color. And this is here, the Vectorscope is dealing specifically with color. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go under YC waveform, pull that up. You're not going to need to use the setup 7.5 IRE. This is for kind of old standard definition DV video. You can uncheck that, and if your chroma is on, you can actually uncheck that as well. That's for kind of fine-tune, nitty-gritty digital detail, which isn't really necessary to help with correction. I mean, it is to an extent, but with this basic stuff we're doing, it's not. So let's describe this right here. This is your waveform monitor. Under your waveform monitor, we have, this is a representation of your image from left to right. And what this is the lower it goes, the darker it is. Then you got kind of your middle gray region, and then as you get up toward 100 and past that on the scale, it is your brightness levels. So down here are your darks, your mids, and your highlights, and your brightness, your brights here. Now what the scale kind of means here is you've got, this is measured on what's called the IRE scale. These are IREs, Institute of Radio Engineers is what that stands for. It's a standard that's been set up. Down at 0, this is kind of where you can look at as your details basically are disappearing in your dark areas. The details in your image are going to disappear kind of electronically around 0 here. Now, what 100 represents is where your highlights lose detail in the brights, in the whites. So this is kind of like crushing your blacks in here, as they call it, and this is blowing out your whites at the top here. So you usually try to keep things within a range of from 0 to 100. Oftentimes an image will come in and you'll get everything kind of squeezed toward the middle here. We have your darks up above 10 and your lights kind of down below 90. And if they're all, the more this area here is all squeezed together, your image is going to be what we call flat. It's going to be the more that this area and this area is closer together, your image is getting flat. Now, the more this is spread out, the more contrast you have. That's what the contrast is defined as, is this is a stretched region between your darks and your highlights, and you get contrast. And film and cinematic images tend to have more contrast, and video tends to look more flat. So that's your kind of goal, is to make your image not look so flat and a little more contrasty in the end. But first of all, you got to work on correcting things. So we're going to start correcting things here. And your darks here are looking like they're not too dark. They're above 10. So usually you want things in between, kind of like 5 and 10 on some of your darks to get them to define them so they're not so flat. So what we're going to do to correct this is we're going to go over to our input slider, and we're going to grab our darks, or what is called our input slider. And you'll notice as we drag our input sliders toward the middle here, this is our dark slider, this is our mid slider, and this is our highlight slider. As you drag these toward the middle, notice that it exaggerates those things. This exaggerates the whites. You drag it toward the middle on the dark, and it exaggerates the darks. It crushes the darks. And look how contrasty we're getting, and we're kind of killing our image here. But that's what happens on your input slider. As you drag your highlights toward the middle and your darks toward the middle, it's going to exaggerate them, or it's going to basically stretch this region more as you pull them toward the middle. Your output sliders do the opposite. As you drag them, this is going to unexaggerate, I guess, your darks and unexaggerate your highlights, which is creating more of a flat image. And notice that our waveform here is pulling closer together. So on our waveform here, to define the waveform, if you look at this, this is a representation of your image from left to right. As we move over, we're seeing kind of the darker area of the building there. It moves over to this side, and you see the brighter areas of this building. And then it kind of goes down to mids for this section of the building. And you move over, and there's a little bit of highlight right there. Is that really that strip of sky right there? You can see that highlight right there that's making this brightness level right there. So what we're going to do here is correct this image. We're going to drag our darks and drag them down below 10 here. Just about right there. Add a little bit of contrast. We're going to grab our highlights. If your highlights are over 100, you're actually going to bring them down. I'm going to bring them down to like about, I'm doing that on the output slider here. Drag that down to between 95 and 90 to kind of preserve some of the details. You'll see some of these details coming back in the highlights if it's not too overexposed. Now what this middle slider does is that you just kind of look at this as an exposure meter. You're like saying, no, not meter, an exposure changer, I guess. We're going to boost this up just a teeny bit and brighten our image a little bit if it looks too dark. If you have a nicely calibrated monitor, you'll be able to tell if you're really where your exposure should lie. I mean, you're kind of looking here in the mid region. Kind of a good, nicely exposed image will lie between 40 and 60 on the IRE scale. And our buildings here are between that. So we've got that nicely exposed. But you're going to have to use a combination of the scope and your eyeballs on a nicely calibrated monitor. If you're using a Mac monitor on a laptop, usually those are, but you can have your brightness turned down and turned up on the monitor, so it's not always accurate. Hence the reason to use scopes or a calibrated monitor, broadcast monitor. But not everybody has like a $5,000 broadcast monitor. Okay, so let's quickly go over this first category here, legality. And let's talk about legality within IREs on the waveform monitor. So once again, you got a window, workspace, and changes for color correction. Down to this window here, I'm going to click on this little pull down and make sure that I'm on the YC waveform. And on the YC waveform, like I said, I would uncheck these two items right here. Legality here is pretty easy because you just make sure that your darks aren't touching 0 and that your highlights aren't touching 100. You can have them a little bit under each one of those. Talk about legality, we're talking about usually with broadcast companies. If you're going to have your project screened on a television, on a broadcast station, they're going to want it to meet certain legal requirements. And with your waveform, you're not going to be hitting 0, and you're not going to be hitting 100, and your kind of average exposure is going to be between 40 and 60 for kind of for general exposure. Like this building right here, we're getting that area that reaches between 40 to 60, so it's pretty well exposed. It's exposed properly. Once again, if we're going to be doing color correction here, just go through that process really quick. We're going to add a fast color corrector to this clip, drag that, drop it on, go to Effects Controls, and we already showed this, but quickly, just refresher. Going to do tonality first. Bring the darks down so they about 5 IRE. Bring the highlights down so they're not quite touching 100 there, so they're just barely under 100. You want them to be bright, but not terribly bright. And now I'm going to mess with my exposure meter here. Now I'm going to get with my exposure slider here, my mids exposure, and get that where I feel it should be. Now, let's do before and after. Not a whole lot of change there, but we've kind of made it meet legal requirements there. Let's go to the next thing here, matching looks. So let me show you meeting legal requirements as far as color goes. I'm going to click on this little pull down here, and we're going to go to Vectorscope. Vectorscope, we're going to, let me expand this. And now these little boxes here, these little squares, show saturation legal points for the inner ones are going to be for basically standard definition or DV video. The outer ones are for HD. The outer ones have more HD has higher tolerance for color saturation. The way a Vectorscope works, it shows you your color saturation, which is how much color you have. You have two things within color. You have basically hue or balance, which is basically the colors that exist in that within that image, and you have saturation. That's basically not just what color, but how much of that color. That's basically the definition of saturation versus color balance. This clip here has a color balance. If you look, we got our RGB channel here. We've got red, green, and blue. If you look at your color wheel over here, this color wheel over here has the exact same colors. It has in the same spots: red, green, blue. And then in between, you have as you mix your red and greens together, you start getting a yellow range there. As you go in between green and blue, you start getting a cyan range there. And as you go in between red and blue, you're getting a magenta range there. So in between your red and blue, you have the magenta range there. And you will see that that's reflected on this color wheel over here that you're going to be using to manipulate color. Now, and that is your color balance. Right now, this shot has some blue and cyan color balance, a little bit of green going off to the green. You're going from the center point here, and a little bit of red and yellow and a little bit of magenta, but this has a lot of kind of blue and cyan, and that blue and cyan is really coming from the sky, and the sky reflecting on this building. You're getting a lot of blue in this shot here. It's not overly blue. The shot looks pretty decent, but now this is the saturation point. From the middle point out is showing you how much saturation until it kind of reaches those legal limits there. Let's show an example. Got this clip selected. We're going to go over to saturation. We're going to oversaturate this. Look at, as I turn up the saturation, look what happens with the color wheel here. I'm going to turn it up to 200% there. You'll notice it increased. It became more saturated. I'm going to undo that and see the difference there. Redo it, and you'll see the difference there. How much more saturation? So it didn't change the color balance at all by saturating it. It kept the same color balance, but it is now more saturated. Look at this shot, way blue. Sometimes you do want to oversaturate something just a little bit to make it look kind of give it a cool style. I'm going to turn that back to 100 there. Actually, now let's take this down to 0. Watch what happens to this chart as I take it to 0. 0. Let's expand this. You'll notice with no color in it, this is black and white. Everything is sucked into this little middle point right there. And this is 0 saturation. No color in this shot. If you're doing color correction on a black and white film, it's really easy. You're just basically doing tonality, and you're not messing with colors. Okay, watch that little bead. I'm going to grab my saturation. I'm going to click and drag. Watch this little bead and watch what happens as I drag this to the right. As I add more saturation, it grows and grows and grows. And there you go. So now we've got 200% saturation there. 200 is the limit that it goes on the saturation point. You can add more colors by doing a gain on the wheel, which we will cover here in a little bit. If you want to add more blue, you can drag your wheel, drag it off toward the blue here. And this is basically a color balance manipulator here. As you grab this little ball here in the middle and drag it out, it's going to, and look at the Vectorscope there, how it's changing colors, it's going to add more of those colors. This is kind of additive and subtractive, because as you're dragging it over toward the blue, it's going to start taking colors out from the opposite spectrum over here. And you'll notice now this is a very blue shot, and it's taken out a lot of the red and yellows out of that shot there. If I grab this, so if I say, oh, I think this is a little too blue here, and we want to just warm that up a teeny bit, I'm going to drag it up to the warm region here. And you'll notice, look at the Vectorscope changing, and look at the shot warming up. Let me turn the saturation back down to 100 because it's oversaturated. But let's reset the wheel here. Now watch what happens as I drag it off into the warm region here. The shot is warming up, the building's warming up, the sky is warming up, everything. This is kind of a global coloring wheel right here. There's ways of doing secondaries, which is just pulling out the blues and other things, and scaling back just blue or red or specific channels. There's a bunch of different ways to do that. But there we go. We warmed up the shot a little bit by just dragging it over to the other direction. Look at our Vectorscope. Less blue. Now there's more warmth in the shot here. It's kind of the warm region up here, and this is kind of the cool region down here. Two kind of common regions with color correction. Okay, but that shot didn't need corrected. Let's go on to matching a couple of shots here. So we talked about legality. I want to talk about matching shots now, as far as what you need to do to get shots to match and look like each other. As we play through this clip, there's a couple different shots in here. Let's move ahead. Okay, let's look at these two shots right here. As we go from this shot here and we cut to the next shot there, you're going to see a significant difference. These were two different cameras that we shot with. One was a Sony F3 and one was a red camera. They were shooting two cameras at the same time. But you'll notice a completely different color. Look at the skin tone from here to there. And you can see that on the Vectorscope. You can see that this kind of goes off towards the yellow region. And then when it cuts to this shot, it goes more kind of this neutral shot here where you've got some reds, greens, blues, and everything kind of even there. So if we want to get this shot to match this shot, we're going to have to get these colors to look closer. So what I'm going to do is select one clip here. Actually, we're going to go to Effects, grab our Fast Color Corrector, drag and drop it to this clip. Now, if you want to see the clip that you want to match, what I'm going to do is we're going to try to match it to this shot here. I'm going to load a frame from this shot into my source monitor. We've shown how to do that just by hitting F. F loads a frame from your playhead into your source monitor. There it is. So now I can move back and have this clip selected, have the playhead over it so I can see what I'm changing, and now I can look at these side by side and get these things to match. Before I do that, I'm going to kind of fix this shot first. So, and actually I can grab my color corrector, which is still neutral, nothing's changed on it, copy it, I highlight it, hit Command C, go over to this clip, highlight it, Command V as in Victor, and paste. Pasted it, now I've got a color corrector on it. So let's quickly do a correction on this. Go to YC Waveform. We're going to bring down the darks, sliding up the input slider on the darks to about 5 IRE. We're going to grab our whites. Our whites really aren't overexposed, so we really don't need to bring down our whites here. If you got overexposure over 100, you're going to drag that down until it meets, just goes under, barely under 100. So we're a little bit overexposed, so I'm going to bring down the exposure just a teeny bit. Right about there. Okay, so I fixed the tonality on that. We're going to add some cinematic contrast later. We're going to show you how to do that. But now I'm going to look at my colors. I'm going to go under Vectorscope here. And we're going to look at the colors here. And let's just play with this a little bit, see if we get this kind of in an area that we like. I'm going to cool it off just a teeny bit. I don't really like that, so I'm going to drag it back, warm it up, just move this around a little bit. See, there's an area. So warming this up just a teeny bit to bring back a little bit of the skin tone here. Okay, now we're going to try to get this shot to match this shot right here. Going to get the colors closer there. So I'm going to grab my color wheel. I'm going to drag it a little bit over in this direction, the cooler direction right here. And you can see what it's doing with the skin tone. That's kind of cooling off the skin tone right there. And actually, I'm going to bring the saturation down. It's a little too saturated. So I'm going to try 90% saturation. And it sucked in the saturation a little bit. It got this closer where they're starting to look a bit closer. But you keep tweaking these things until you get the shots to match. Let me show you before and after. There's before. There's after. Look at the image over here. Before and after. You see a difference there. Now I'm going to, I did not correct the tonality on this, so I'm going to go to YC Waveform, do that, bring down my darks until they're about 5 IRE, or close to 0. I'm hitting 100 here. I'm kind of peaking on the highlights. So I'm going to bring the highlights just down a little bit, about 98, 97 there, and turn up my exposure just a teeny bit. Now let's play from this shot to the next. Watch here as I play. And it looks closer. Still needs a little bit of tweaking, but that's the basic concept right there. To get it to look at it before, let me turn it off. And now look at the contrast here between this shot and that shot. Way different. And we've made it get closer as a result. Okay, so that is basically how you use the waveform and the Vectorscope to do your color correction to get shots to match. So we've gone through legality with tonality and color. We've gone through matching. Same thing you'll want to do with tonality is you'll want to match it from shot to shot. Meet the legality and also match it from shot to shot. Let's talk about the looks now. If we're talking about looks, and actually Premiere Pro does come with some pre-built looks that comes over from SpeedGrade here. And let me clear out my fast color corrector here. If you look under Lumetri looks, these looks are ones that have been brought over from SpeedGrade and that implement into Premiere. And these are some nice looks here. What this does is gives kind of a general look for your entire project or a portion of your project. And let's do this. We're going to go here and we're going to create a new adjustment layer. We're going to go to New Item, hit New, and we're going to go Adjustment Layer. I've already got some adjustment layers here I can use, but I'm just going to show you how to create one. Once you hit OK, I've already got like 3 of them here created, and I don't quite need that many. I'm going to grab an adjustment layer here that I've created and drag and drop it over my entire project. What this is going to do, you'll notice nothing really happens when you put this adjustment layer over. It comes in like neutral. It's just a layer that whatever you add to this layer is going to affect everything below it. So this is kind of nice to be able to add a look to your project once you've done your basic color correction. Because the color correction we haven't really done anything that looks cool. We've met legality and matched the looks from shot to shot. But now, this is where I kind of like to use Luma curves if you're trying to go for a contrasty look, because this gives you the cinematic look here. I'm going to grab a Luma curve, drag and drop it to the adjustment layer. Notice anytime I affect this now, that file, that effect is added to this adjustment layer. It'll affect everything below it. So now when I grab this and start doing some tweaks, I'm going to go extreme here. You'll notice it does it to the entire project. Give it really heavy contrast to the entire project. Whatever you do here on that adjustment layer is going to affect anything below it. And it just doesn't affect the item below it, it affects everything below it. See, watch as I move to the next clip. Next, it's affected everything below it. So this is adding a look to your entire movie. I'm going to reset this here. Okay, so once this is reset, what the Luma curve does here is it basically does the tonality switch, the tonality fixes, same as those sliders, but it's a little bit more powerful in that you can do it on a curve as opposed to just affecting the darks or the lights or the mids. You can kind of gradually ramp it off by doing a curve. If you grab this, this is basically your black slider right here down on this end. As you slide it to the right, it's going to darken the darks. As you grab this one here and drag it down, it's going to darken the lights. So this is a white slider, this is a white node, and this is a dark node basically. As you drag it the opposite direction, it'll brighten the lights it'll brighten the darks. So once again, this is dark, this is light, and we're changing those attributes by bringing up the lights, bringing down the darks. If you bring up this corner, this is going to be very overexposed. If you bring everything down to this corner down here, it's going to darken everything. So this corner is kind of the dark corner, this is the light corner, this is the light node, this is the dark node. And basically going from the bottom to the top is your darkness levels to your lightness levels. So what we can do here is we can go somewhere in the middle and we can click right around here. This is now, keep in mind, this is going up toward the white node. So this is about, what is that, about like 20% up. That's about 20% darks right there is what we're affecting. If we grab this and drag it down toward the darks, what that's doing is darkening the darks around this area without crushing the dark. So this is really nice to add contrast. You can drag down the darker areas and create a contrast without badly affecting, without crushing the details in your darks or your lights. And you create what's called an S-curve here. This mild S-curve right here will create contrast. If we go under our color correction and look at a waveform as we do this, you'll notice you'll start to see this area stretch. Watch what happens as I uncheck that. Notice how it all squeezes back together. Now it's tighter here in the middle. But with the LumaCurve, we created a stretch which creates contrast. Look at the image before and after. There's before, kind of a flat look, and here is after. And you get that heavy contrast. This is a little bit heavy contrast, but this is a look. And now it has added that entire look for the entire project here, for the since I've got that adjustment layer going over the entire project. This is a bit too contrasty, but you get the point here. Let's play through this here. So we play from this shot to the next, to the next. We get this contrasty look throughout the entire project. Flat, cinematic. Flat, cinematic. Say we want to cool our entire project off a little bit and have kind of a cool look or a warm look. What we can do is go here. Let's go back to Fast Color Corrector. Drag and drop that to our adjustment layer, and now we can just simply cool off our entire project by pulling it down to the blue or pulling it up and making it warm. If you want to make a little sepia tone look or you want to make it a little bluish look, there you go. Let's make this kind of a cold bluish cast. You'll notice it has added it to the entire project. If we take it up this direction, the warmth has now been added to the entire project. There we go. And that is a look. So kind of the steps that we did there, we went legality, matching, and then you go for a look in the end to make it look cinematic or kind of give that finishing touch there. These are the basics. If you want to, let's get rid of this adjustment layer here. Actually, I'm going to get rid of the filters on this adjustment layer. I'm going to get rid of my LumaCurve and my Fast Color Corrector. And what we're going to do is go down. Here are some pre-built looks under the Lumetri looks. They've got some really nice ones in here. If you go under cinematic, on a bleach bypass look, drag that, drop it onto the adjustment layer, and boom, we just added a bleach bypass look to the entire clip. There's been a pre-treated one here. If you think it comes in too heavy, all you have to do is select the adjustment layer, go to opacity, and turn the opacity down of the adjustment layer and get it where you think it looks good, so it's doesn't come in so harsh. There's at 68%. Let's look at 100%. Undo. 100% and redo 68%. So right there, if you think that looks good, then you can keep that on there. I'm going to turn off this one and look at some different, actually I'll just delete it, and look at some different looks here. Let's turn that back to 100 on our adjustment layer. Add Cinematic 1 to it, see what this looks like. See how it adds that heavy contrast? Too much contrast, but it looks cinematic. So I'm going to grab my opacity. Actually, this will do it on a keyframe. You don't want to do it that way. Let me show you a better way of doing this so you don't add a keyframe. If you go down to your video 2 line and you do a higher track height and you go up to your little wrench here and say show video keyframes, you have an opacity line for the entire clip right there. Now you can just drag that down. Let's go like about 63% on that adjustment layer. Let's see it when it's turned on and off here. There's without the adjustment layer. There's with, and that's good. That's around 60% opacity for that cinematic look, and this is looking pretty good. Looks kind of cool. So there's a step process for some basic color correction and some basic color instruction inside of Premiere. If you have any questions or have any suggestions for future episodes, let me know, and I will create a video for it and post it for you so you guys to answer any questions you may have.